Why? Because he cares for us, and he's able to do something about it. So that's really a good message. That's good news. All right. We are continuing on with our series here in Joseph. And if you have some, if you want, follow along on the message notes. Feel free to pull those out and use that if you like. You know, I heard something this past week. It's kind of interesting. A person said, I'm old enough to make my own decisions, but I'm not young enough to remember what it is I decided. Hopefully that doesn't go on like that. We're speaking about waiting and trusting the Lord, and one thing too about waiting isn't so bad. Is trying to keep a good attitude while you wait that is so hard, isn't it? So this message is entitled, Life is Full of Awkward Silences, from Genesis 41. We'll read that in just a moment, but let's begin in prayer. Lord, again, thank you so much for today and for your marvelous grace. And I thank you that we really can cast all our cares upon you, knowing that you care for us, because you really do. And you're able to help us in ways that we could never imagine. And Lord, I pray now, bless the rest of our time together, and take these words as we look into your passage, this text of Scripture, and apply it to our hearts and minds by your Spirit, and just the way that you'd want it to. For we pray this in his name. Well, life is full of awkward silences. Maybe you're in a conversation with someone, and all of a sudden, they might say something innocently enough, but all of a sudden you realize it's embarrassing to someone. Look at this, why we have so many over here and so few sitting on this side. It's almost like I need to, we got to even that out. Or along the back there, we need to, anyway. You might be saying something to something, they might say something embarrassing, and all of a sudden, awkward silence, Or, you may be having a phone call with someone, all of a sudden they realize that they, maybe they forgot what it was they were going to say, kind of awkward silence. Or maybe you run across somebody and they say, what do you think of my new dog? And you look at their dog, and it's the ugliest dog you've ever seen. What do you say? Kind of awkward silence. Well, Joseph had his time of awkward silence too, and we'll see that in our passage for this morning. So it's from Genesis 41. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but parts of it, so we can see what was going on here. Genesis 41. Let me begin. It says, after 2 whole years, notice that after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. And it goes on, it says he had another dream similar. And then down in verse 8, it says, so in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. And then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. Quite a description there for where he was. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. And I'm just going to skip down to verse 28. So the Pharaoh tells Joseph his 2 dreams, and then Joseph says to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are 1. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what God is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." All right, quite a passage. If you're following along on the sheet, I have point 1 there. Says, when hope died. So the cupbearer who had been put in prison, the cupbearer to the king, was met with Joseph, and they kind of strike an informal deal. Joseph helps him, and in return, the cupbearer is supposed to help Joseph. And so finally, Joseph thinks, finally some hope. If he puts in a good word for me, I can get out of here. And so that gives him some hope. Well, 2 years go by and nothing. Like at the end of chapter 40, it says, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but he forgot him. So for 2 years, nothing. And I'm sure each time, Joseph here, he's waiting, and he's been in prison all this time. And like reminds me of something Solomon once said in a proverb. He says, like a bad tooth and an unsteady foot is confidence in a faithless man in time of trouble. Isn't that right? Trying to trust, if you have a bad tooth. But now remember, Joseph, it said, had been in prison for some time before he met the cupbearer. And now it says 2 more years have gone by. So he's been in there for quite a while. And as far as Joseph is concerned, think of it. He has no idea when he's going to get out, if ever. As far as he knows, this might be his life now, in prison. For 13 years, he's either been a slave or he's been in prison. That's a long time. And all he had every day was just waiting. Back in these prisons, there was no computers, there's no cell phones, there's no TV. Probably didn't even have a book to read. And I think for 2 years, he could probably hear his hope dying. Maybe at first, every time maybe somebody might come by his cell, maybe his spirit's lifted, maybe this is the day, he finally put in a good word for me and I'm getting out, but then each time nothing, and his heart would be broken again. And then, he'd probably be trying different things to keep his hope up. Well, soon I'm sure he's going to put in a good word for me. I should be hearing from him soon, and more time goes by, and maybe starts coming up some possible explanations why he hasn't heard anything yet, and maybe the cupbearer, maybe he's sick, and he just can't yet, and maybe he's visiting his family, so when he gets back, he'll put in a good word for me, and still nothing. And pretty soon he's left to probably, marking the days and months on the prison wall. And eventually, still nothing, as I said, for 2 years, nothing goes on. And he's just waiting. It's like, waiting like that is really, it's real suffering. And, maybe as you think of him, here he's, his life, his best years of his life, is just passing him by. He's just sitting here. And all of us, not sitting in prison, but have done various things, perhaps, where we're waiting, or we have an extended time of waiting. Even if it's just waiting for a callback on a job. Maybe it's waiting for the lab results to come in, waiting for the depression to lift, waiting for some injury to heal, waiting for something, anything to happen, waiting for a friend to call, waiting for God to do something and rescue you out of this situation. We've all been through all kinds of waiting. The temptation then is just to give up. It's like there was once a little boy, he's 5 years old. His parents took him to the county fair, and as it wasn't that far from their house, and he was enjoying it, but somehow while there at the fair, he got separated from his parents, and so he started looking around for him. It was starting to get dark, and he started to get a little more scared, and he couldn't find his parents anywhere. He went out to where the car was parked, couldn't find the car, and he thought, well, maybe I'll try to walk home, and he starts to walk home, and he just gets hopelessly lost. And as he's walking, and he's getting darker, and all these thoughts, going through his head, where are my parents? Have they forgotten about me? Have they abandoned me? Why did they, did they really want to, get rid of me, and so they ditched me at the fair? What's going on? And you can imagine all the thoughts that might just, crazy thoughts that might pass through especially a 5-year-old's head when he's fearful like that. Well, fortunately, in that case, a neighbor saw him wandering the streets and knew who he was and took him and brought him home to his parents. But, in much the same way, imagine Joseph, too, sitting there in prison all this time. Imagine some of the crazy thoughts, maybe not so crazy, thoughts that might go through your head. Like you might be thinking of the cupbearer. Why is he taking so long? Why doesn't some news come? I thought we kind of had a deal. I helped him, he would help me. But nothing. And eventually, probably you just quit. He's not coming. And that much time goes by. Ever been in a situation like that where you feel abandoned by your friends, abandoned by God, feel like nothing's happening? You're all alone now. It's you against the world now. Well, point 2 on the sheet here says, what can we learn when God seems silent? What can we learn when God seems silent? For 2 years, Joseph was in prison and nothing's going on. And this may be it for him. Well, I put a few things there on the sheet. First one, it's okay to have honest doubts. It is. Every once in a while I've heard or read, some people who said they had to leave a certain church because it was in that particular church, it was frowned upon to have any doubts. You're supposed to have faith and you're not supposed to have doubts. And, well, in a perfect world, and if you have perfect faith, you probably won't have any doubts. But we don't live in that kind of a situation. It's okay. I want to say it's okay to have honest doubts. I have no problem with anyone who has honest doubts. Who hasn't had doubts about something at some point in their Christian life? We all do. It's natural. And that's okay because there are answers for those doubts, for those questions. That's how we learn. As we have doubts, we have questions. There are answers. There are answers. And so that's why, again, Christianity is never afraid of the hard questions. It never is, because God is a God of truth. So all truth is God's truth. Well, John the Baptist, remember once after he got thrown into prison, that he says, he started to have doubts. He sent his disciples. He said, hey, go tell Jesus and ask him this. Are you the one, or should we be expecting someone else? Why would he say that? He's the one that baptized Jesus. He's the one that heard, the voice, the heavens open up and he heard the voice of God say, this is my beloved Son. He had all those experiences. Why now is he having these doubts? And him. But that's not such an unusual thing, is it? You get put in a very stressful situation, a very tough situation. Think, here's John the Baptist. He knew he was the forerunner of the Messiah. He had an important role. The forerunner should be out there preaching about the Messiah coming, and here he is in prison, rotting away in prison. It makes no sense. I should be out there, not here. So did I get this all wrong? Am I confused about everything? He had doubts. And so he sent his disciples to go, get some answers. You could say it was kind of a time of awkward silence for him. Well, just like that little boy, we start thinking crazy thoughts. Maybe God doesn't love me anymore. We become haunted not really by the reality of things, but by how things feel to us at that moment. John the Baptist, a great man, yet he had his doubts, and Jesus goes on and answers his doubts there later in Matthew chapter 11. And so John's doubts really then became like a doorway for him to have through that he came to a greater understanding of who Jesus was. Doubts handled well will do that, can lead to a greater understanding and greater knowledge of God. So it's okay to have doubts, honest doubts. There are answers. Some particular, Joe or me or some might not have all the answers, but the answers are out there. Okay. Second thing, in these times of awkward silences, when it seems like God seems silent, what can we do? One, I put on here, rather than interpreting dreams, learn to interpret life. Joseph's life is kind of interesting because all the dreams he had, and his dreams, and the cupbearer and the baker and their dreams, and now the Pharaoh's dreams, and it's kind of fascinating how God was working through that. But the higher skill in life, it'd be much better to be someone who's good at interpreting life, real life. So often when we try to, our first interpretation of life when we're in a time of awkward silence is to think that God has forgotten us. That would be a wrong interpretation. Where you think, God's not kept his side of the bargain. I have a need, and, God, if he loves me, he should be jumping all over the place trying to solve this thing right now. Who hasn't maybe thought that at times? But, because we live in such a world of immediate gratification, don't we? We all know that. Instant cereals and microwaves and everything's fast. We want fast answers, and, we send out texts and emails, and we expect a response back quickly, and it's just kind of the world in which we live in. I've mentioned before that I think the best screen in life is the screen of life. Rather than always staring at some electronic screen, whether it be on a cell phone or a computer or iPad or a TV, better to look at life. Learn to observe life and what's going on, to see what's really happening. Learn to interpret life. And really, it's kind of another way of saying gain wisdom. There's a lot of knowledge is good, and there's a lot of knowledge out there. There's a lot of facts out there, a lot of false facts out there, a lot of knowledge out there on the internet and all over the place, but boy, our world sure seems to be lacking in wisdom, doesn't it? We need people who are gaining wisdom, who know what to do and how to interpret all these facts that we see going on around us. It's like even we've been aware of this past week or two, like in Hollywood, how they finally, did the right thing and they expelled this man who's been a serial abuser of women. But yet, that was the right thing, but yet they still give Oscars to movies that promote serial abusers of women. And so, are they going to figure that, are they going to stop that then? I hope so. I'm not going to hold my breath and wait and see if they do, but that's all part of wisdom. So rather than interpreting, learn to interpret life, gaining wisdom. Third thing, let your time of waiting deepen you, not embitter you. This is very interesting. Notice when Joseph got out of prison, what did he not come out with? Notice what he did not come out of prison with. He did not come out with anger, bitterness, jealousy, a feeling of wanting to get vengeance. He came out without that. That's amazing. Through all that time of waiting, he might have had some questions, but he never gave up his trust in God. He gave up his trust in the cupbearer, but not in God. And so that's why, again, how important it is, perhaps maybe the best way to measure this awkward silence in Joseph's life, this time when God seemed silent in his life, and he was just left there in prison, waiting, Maybe a good way to measure that is to look at the Joseph who came out of it. The Joseph we see at the end of chapter 41 is it's a Joseph we've never seen before. It's a very different Joseph than what we saw in the earlier chapters. He came out clearly wiser, much more discerning. He came out not only wise, but humble and yet bold, confident, trusting in God. He went into slavery as kind of an arrogant boy. He came out of prison a man of God. And it was his faith in God that did that. He'd been let down by his father. He'd been let down by his brothers. He'd been let down by Potiphar. He'd been let down by Potiphar's wife. He'd been let down by the cupbearer. All these people who had let him down, and yet he comes out with no bitterness. That is amazing. I think he'd gone to past the point where he was trusting in people to do what only God can do. When we try to, when we put our trust in people, whether it might be your spouse or your best friend or somebody like that, but to do something that really only God can really do or make happen, but we expect a person to do that, and then they let us down, and then we get embittered. That's because your trust is in the wrong person. It's in the wrong place. Again, and bitterness really in many ways is its own prison, isn't it? It's like they said, bitterness is like emotional battery acid. It just eats away at you. But he came out without prison. His trust was in God. So he came out without any anger, without any sense of revenge. He could have wanted to, when he came out, get revenge on the cupbearer. He could have wanted to get revenge on Potiphar's wife. You lied about me, and now I'm in jail because of you. Or he could have got mad at his brothers later. We see that he didn't. And so in his period of waiting, we learn that he learns humility. He learns more about what humility is rather than just, say, learning how to spell it. He clearly becomes a much wiser person. And, as the text says too, he became elevated in his position, not because he could just interpret a couple dreams. But that's not what the text says. Pharaoh says elevates him to this high position because he had become a very wise and discerning person. They could see that in him. So that's my third application here, is let your time of waiting deepen you, not embitter you. So that'd be a good question. How about, is there something you're going through now? How are you handling that? Are you letting it make you wiser, or are you letting it make you bitter? Or point 4, do your best, but leave the results in God's hands. In other words, in times of waiting, we don't sit on the couch and twiddle our thumbs. We keep doing all the things that God's called us to do. We keep doing that until he shows us the next step to do. So we work hard, but we trust God. Don't try to use, what too often happens is we try to use our cleverness and to manipulate our situation somehow to our advantage. There's a big difference between doing the right thing and doing something, coming up with some kind of scheme to make things happen the way you prefer them to happen. One is trusting God, the other is just trusting in your own cleverness. When Pharaoh asked Joseph if he could interpret his dreams, Joseph kind of now had Pharaoh where he wanted him. I mean, think of it. Joseph now had the advantage. Pharaoh was asking something of him. Can you do this? You would think that Joseph would have cleverly came up with a deal, made a bargain. Okay, tell you what, I'll interpret your dreams if you kill that forgetful cupbearer of yours who left me in prison. Or he could say, you get me out of jail, set me up in a nice house out in the country, I'll interpret your dreams for you. He didn't do that. Fascinating that he wouldn't do that. We're used to people making bargains, making a deal. But look what he did. He says, Pharaoh asks him, can you interpret his dream? He throws away all his leverage. He says, no, I can't do that. But God can. He could have cut a deal, but he didn't do it. Instead, he just put his trust in God. That's a big step of faith, because as far as all he knew, he could interpret Pharaoh's dreams, and the Pharaoh could have said, okay, back to prison you go, and tell the guard, maybe give him an extra big meal tonight or something, for helping me. He didn't know what was going to happen next. And also remember, interesting in this story, remember who Joseph is. He's a slave. He's a prisoner. He's a foreigner in Egypt. He's not even an Egyptian. And he's speaking to the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Talk about the exact total opposites of the social ladder. Joseph was at the very bottom there in Egypt. Pharaoh was at the very top. And in Egypt, the Pharaoh was often considered like a deity, like a god. And so here Joseph says to him, I can't do it, but God can. Implying, it's like you saying, Pharaoh, people, you're considered like a god around here, but you apparently are not a very good one, because you couldn't even do something as simple as this, but the real God, my God, can do it. It's kind of, Pharaoh could have taken that in a bad way. So again, if we see Joseph putting his trust in God, not even in Pharaoh. So Joseph had, again, learned not to trust in people, but in God. Now, does that mean we can't, not to get me wrong, does that mean we can't trust people? Of course we have to. You can't get along in life without trusting people. You trust that they'll show up. You trust that if you're in their car, if they're driving, you trust that they're a good driver. We're trusting people all day, all the time. But the point is that we trust in, first and foremost, our trust is in God. Secondarily, is in people. Like say you break a leg, you go to the urgent care. There's a doctor there. Is your trust in the doctor? Well, of course it is. You hope he's a good doctor. He'll do a right job. But what can he do? All he can do is, say, set the bone, set it right, or if it needs something a little more than that. He can't make that bone heal. All he can do is set the conditions right so that hopefully healing will occur. Who does the healing? God's our physician. He's the great healer. He's the only one. He's set up our bodies to work in just incredible ways. The doctor doesn't bring any healing. He just helps to make it set so that things can heal, the body can do its thing, but it's the Lord behind all that. So the Lord's our ultimate trust is always in Him. And He's the physician, or in other situations, but secondarily, yes, we trust in people. Well, one more, and that says, who are you becoming in your time of waiting? We all have had times of waiting. We'll all have it again. Who are you becoming? Pharaoh said, there's nobody like Joseph for his wisdom and discernment. Quite a high compliment. Think of it. All it took for Joseph to get like that was, he just had to be betrayed by his brothers. He just had to get sold into slavery for many years. He just had to get unjustly accused and thrown into prison, and then he was forgotten by the cupbearer. That's all it took for him to become wise. Quite a school of hard knocks, ones we'd rather not go through. But anyway, many people have stories, and we've heard them of times when they were deeply disappointed about something. And yet, for some people, when you hear their stories, you still sense, a sense of anger there, of bitterness there, a feeling of wanting to get revenge, or they owe me something. And so it becomes clear that not everybody handles their waiting times well. Joseph did. And he came out of it a very wise and very discerning person. So God, in those times, He wants us to learn to trust Him, probably in some new way that we haven't trusted Him before. And we need to know clearly in our head certain things. Even if we don't feel it, we know certain things, that God is there, and He has not forgotten us, and His plan is unfolding, and His timing is perfect. And that He is looking out for us. We always want God to work faster than what He is. But one thing about this story, mark this well. Let this sink in. And that is, do you realize that even the forgetfulness of the cupbearer was included in the timing of God? That wasn't something that, that was a big problem. God knew about that. I mean, think of that. Even the forgetfulness of the cupbearer was included in the timing of God. It's amazing. It's a very reassuring thought, actually. But life is full of awkward silences. And don't fall prey to people who see everything in black and white and try to give you a simple answer for all your problems, because God works in marvelous ways, sometimes very mysterious ways, and sometimes in 1,000 different ways. And that's why we're always resorting back to we have to trust God, moment by moment. It can be helpful, but sometimes not that helpful. Somebody said, well, I was in a similar situation, this is what I did, so that's what you got to do, and then this will be the result. It may work that way for you, and it this way may not, because God has different plans for you. He's working on different things in your life. He's got different futures for you, what He thinks He wants you to do. So we just have to trust God day by day. And remember this, that when you are waiting, your waiting is never wasted time. It doesn't have to be wasted time. Joseph's time of waiting was not wasted time. I'm sure he wished it would have been cut a lot shorter. But notice who he became because of it. What he was going in and who he was coming out. So, if you could have looked into that prison and seen that little Hebrew boy, and from the looks of things, you would never think that, you would never guess that he mattered to anyone, let alone God. And if we would have thought that, we would have been wrong. So my main takeaway from this here today that I want to say is this. No matter what you are going through, whatever it is, doesn't even matter what it is, anything, no matter what you're going through, God has not forgotten about you. He has not abandoned you. Remember what he told some of his other kids who had thought he had abandoned him? Let me just read it, and I'll close with this from Isaiah 49. I'm going to begin with verse 14. He says, Israel said, his people said, the Lord has forsaken me. My Lord has forgotten me. That's the way they felt. That's the way it looked. That's the way it seemed. Is it true? And here the Lord responds. He says, look, can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? That's not going to happen. But he says, even these may forget. It is possible in a rare situation, a woman might forget her son or child. But God says, yet I will never forget you. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Think of that. So think of that as no matter what you're going through, God has not forgotten you. In fact, He's even got yours, like you might take a marker or a pen and write somebody's name on the palm of your hand. And every time through the day you look, oh yeah, there's Joel. Oh yeah, I remember Joel. God has your name written on the palm of His hand, He says. He's not forgotten you. Well, let's pray. Lord Jesus, again, thank you for this great lesson again we see of how you worked in Joseph's life. And it's good instruction for us today that just as you were at work in his life through those very tough years, when he thought for sure he had been abandoned and forgotten and nothing good was going to come out of this, and yet an amazing good came out of it. And Joseph especially became a very wise, discerning person. Lord, it is our prayer that you would help us to, whatever things we're going through, that we would come out on the other side, and we will come out on the other side, wiser and more discerning, knowing that you have not abandoned us. Even John the Baptist had his doubts, and you quieted his doubts. You answered them. And so, Lord, I thank you that you're able to answer our doubts, and that you're there with us, as you promised you'll never, ever, ever leave us. So we thank you for that. Help us remember that in this new week, that no matter what may happen, good things, bad things, we live in a very evil, dark world. Yet, Lord, thank you that we can walk in the light, knowing that we have an incredible future ahead of us and that we're safe in your hands. For we pray this now in Jesus' name.